I think really marked early YWAM out. And early YWAM is really more or less the story of Lauren and Darlene, you know. Everybody else was part-time, and for the first 10 years or so, only Marty and one or two other people, Marty, my wife, were full-time, and she was full-time from '67. But Lauren really had this, he had a real determination to communicate well. So even as early as 1968, 69, he was doing films. You know, so they'd have a camera along. Every team would have a photographer, and they would have a writer who would write up, and they would communicate really well about that. In some ways, I think that when Lauren was pioneering, we were more systematic about communication than we've ever been since. So like when I got to my first into the School of Evangelism, there had already been a good, pretty creative film made of the previous School of Evangelism in very early 1969. And you know, not long after that, Marty and I were married in 1970, and we came back to the School of Evangelism that we'd attended the year before. And so that would have been early '71, and he was committed to doing to videotaping the lectures. Well, videotaping was really new, you know, it's 2-inch tape. You know? And they took up an offering, and God spoke to us, and we gave all of our honeymoon money away. So there was that real commitment from him, and then that really transmitted into all of us to communicate well at a time when communication was really slow, and film and letters were about the best you could do. And Marty has you know, a lot of her work in those first 2 years, '67 and '68, was in an office with one of those hand-cranked offset printing presses, you know, with the plates that you make up and crank them off. Because having a mailing list, you know, staying in touch with the people who've been on YWAM and getting in touch with people who are interested in coming was just crucial. And the first thing that he said to us when we came to Pioneer in England was he showed us the little contact cards that they would use. And you know, we'd print them out in these little 3x5 cards, and they'd have our return address on them. So we had to get a return address in England. And then wherever we went, we carried those cards with us, and we had people fill those out. And we really faithfully sent out a newsletter every month. And so communication was a pretty big deal. And I think when we were small, because it's always easier to communicate when you're small, when we were small, we did a better job than we've done since then. But for us, we picked up that real heart for communication. Didn't make any films, but we did do very faithfully. You know, always saw to it that we had a newsletter out every month, and we built up our mailing list. Boy, before long, when we'd only been here 3 or 4 years, we had a mailing list of 4,000 young people, and churches and pastors and all. And therefore, when we did a summer outreach or when we were running a school, we had a database of people who were already interested, and that was one of the real keys to filling all of our outreaches and our schools and everything we ran in the 1970s. And we then expanded a bit more, and we had a drama team, and we had what was called a multimedia tour. You know, at that time, the whole idea of slide shows with a big screen, 4 different projectors, phasing in and out, it was really cool, you know. And we did a whole tour around the country. It was just this multimedia slideshow recruiting people into missions. And then, you know, when Keith Green tragically and unexpectedly died in a plane crash, then there was a Keith Green memorial tour, and we used that to call people into missions, because that was his final message. He'd already been on a tour with Lauren, a Great Commission tour, and then we did a Keith Green memorial tour, just showing his passion for that. So, you know, if we don't communicate, we can't do what we're called to do. And yet I think communication requires something that we find harder to discover now than we did then, because we were in it for the long haul, and we were in it to remain and do what we were doing until someone could do it better. You know, so Marty and I didn't have a sense of long-term call to England, but we weren't going to leave until somebody was in place who could do it better. But the thing is, it just kept growing and growing, and so we stayed. But what we find hard now is to find people who will do those kinds of roles, like keeping a database, and making it as personal as possible. Personally staying in touch with people, and communicating well with them, and then if and when they go, passing it on to someone else. Because what so often happens is we get a change of personnel, and the database gets lost, or we have a computer crash and nobody knows how to recover the data, and nobody's committed to recovering the data. And so I find again and again in lots of YWAM bases, including ours here, I'm sad to say, we collect names and we're in touch with people, and then we have some change and we lose it all, and all that information is gone, and that's really a shame, because those are people who've connected with us and feel they're part of the family. And so we're doing new things now. We're doing a refresh week next month, where people who feel a part of the family just come and reconnect with us. And Marty and I are re-engaging with that again, and we're going to keep the database, because we just think that's so important. We don't want that to get lost again. So I do think communication is really important. Then we went on and developed, we joined a very small organization, a couple dozen people at most. But then by the mid-'80s, we were 2,000 to 3,000 YWAMers, and we had contact with probably 500,000 or more people around the world. And things changed quite a lot then. We went through that phase that I think lots of YWAMers have heard about, where we became more organizational and more headquarters. And we had Floyd McClung, who is just an outstanding communicator, and he's just such a good speaker, and he writes really well, and he looks good on camera. So the result of that was we became more centralized. And we had an office in Amsterdam that was kind of the functioning headquarters. We had 220 people doing headquarters functions in Amsterdam. And as a result of that, we were better at communicating to the world that speaks English and the world that has modern communication tools and so on. But we kind of excluded a lot of other language groups and people who were not on the cutting edge of technology. And then after a few years of that, we realized, I think starting in 2002, that God was saying, decentralize more, decentralize more, decentralize more. So now it comes down to every location, every team, just making those relationships with people who God calls you to and puts your heart together with, and staying in touch with them, communicating regularly. Just on a personal note, Marty and I really struggled financially for about 12 to 15 years, as we kept having more kids and needed more money. And God dealt with us about several things: generosity, stewardship, and so on. But one of the main things was we felt like God said, communicate regularly to people who want to know. So we keep a personal list of people. It's not big, but it's our friends, and it's people who said they'll pray for us. And I communicate with them every 2 months. They know my schedule, they know where I am, what I'm doing, and I'll report back every 2 months how it went. I send them, like I'm just back from China, I send them all a report on that. And that provides, the communication provides a support in prayer especially, a support in interest, a support of people with gifts and abilities that you never know, when you're going to need. We were desperate to have the equipment to keep our base in decent shape, and one of the people on my mailing list showed a real interest, and sure enough, he was able to. He was the guy that God spoke to get us a new tractor and mowing equipment and all that kind of thing. So without communication, none of that stuff happens, and I think every YWAMer has got to take seriously the 18th value, which is that we're committed to communicate well and with integrity. So we don't exaggerate, and we don't lie, we don't mislead people, and we don't try to make ourselves out to be more important than we are. But we communicate regularly and honestly, We put that in, well, just 2 or 3 years ago because God had really been dealing with us about the fact that we need to be doing a better job on communication. And we're trying, you know. And now we have so many, communication is evolving at an incredibly rapid pace. One of my sons just went to work for a company that does software for the very large companies that need to communicate with very complex databases. And they need to be able to use chats and Skypes and Facebooks and Twitter and everything, you know, phone. And you realize, you know, when he was describing what his new job looks like, I thought, man, there are so many means of communication for so many different purposes. It's really complex now. But the people who stay on top of it and use it really relationally are the ones who will best be able to do what they and we are called to do, which is to mobilize tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands more people into world missions. I was really impressed with a guy that I met first, I don't know, 7 or 8, 9 years ago. He was a young guy who went to a DTS, and he was just a passionate missionary kind of guy. You know, he went to the DTS because he was called to missions. And while he was on his DTS, God spoke to him to sacrifice. And he said, you can go if you want, but if you sacrifice and stay back and work administratively and concentrate on communication, you can multiply yourself 100-fold, 200-fold. And he did. So at one of our YWAM bases, he has set up a whole system of communication, which I think is fantastic. They send teams out, they go to youth events all over their country. They always get phone numbers. You know, they're after phone numbers, not mailing addresses on cards. You know, they're after phone numbers. And when they come back, they don't just get phone numbers, they find out as much about that person as possible, assuming they have an interest in missions. They're not just after anybody. And when they get back, then they train all their students in their school to spend, I think it's 2 nights a week. And they train them with the questions that are going to be asked and the information that people want to know, and they let them know where they can find that information, and they point them to all those websites and everything. And then those people get on the phone and they phone all those contacts. And they are committed to stay in touch with those people whose names and phone numbers they get until they either say, you know, I'm not interested anymore, please don't phone me again, or, right, I finished my application process, I'm signed up, I'm going to this school, and I'll let you know how it goes. You know, so I think that's fantastic. And you'll note that the bases or the YWAM training centers that make communication a really high priority for them. It doesn't have to be that way, but you know, some way. Their schools are full. You know, you go into Kona. You know, Kona's by far the biggest student body we have anywhere. And if you go into their Gateways ministry, the first thing you'll notice is, man, they've developed incredible tools of communication. And they've got big plasma screens, and every school is displayed on a screen with every student, their names, and where they are in the application process, and how they moved along. And every school leader walks in and sees that. Not only that, anybody else, including me or Lauren Cunningham or anyone else, can walk in and see where the students are in the process. And if it's a slow process, if they first contacted us, say 5 weeks ago, and they still haven't been accepted to a school, then anybody can ask, why not? You know? And then you can say, oh, well, they were followed up once with a phone call, but they weren't followed up again. So you can talk to that school leader and say, what's happening? You know, you got 3 or 4 people there that haven't been followed up in a couple of weeks after they started the application process. Can you do something about that? Yeah, that's a real incentive to communicate well. And I think that's one of the great keys to why you know, they regularly expect 600 students a quarter, because they communicate really, really well with those prospective students. Overall, of course, the best communication is people who have come to YWAM found a deep relationship with God and with others through it, and go back and tell their friends and tell their family and tell their home church. And word of mouth is still, in spite of all the technology and everything that we can use, word of mouth is still the best initial communicator. Then after that, we need to use all the tools that are available to us, from phone calls through to Twitter, to keep people informed and connected. I think one other thing to say is I think a lot of people underestimate how many people want to find out about YWAM. But we get around 30 to 40,000 new visitors to YWAM.org every month. Unbelievable. They stay on and visit an average of 12 pages. So what I've been doing over the last few years with having some responsibility for communications in YWAM is saying, let's focus on that. Man, where else are we going to get 38,000 people who are really interested in YWAM and interested in missions coming and asking us questions? No other place. Let's focus on that. So what we're trying to do is make .org really easily navigable. And more than that, we're working on it, and Colin Forbes is very close to being finished with the YWAM survey thing, which kind of a misnomer. Basically, that means that every single operating location can keep all of their details of schools they're running, staff positions they need, focus of ministry for them. All that can be kept up to date automatically by them. They don't have to tell somebody else who it is the data. They can log on and update it. And I think that'll be a great incentive for people to realize, man, we've got an audience of all interested people, bigger than any crowd I'll ever speak to in my life, coming every month. So, man, I need to put effort into this. And that's the idea we are trying to get across more and more. Because every YWAM base of the world is reachable, it's navigable to through YWAM.org, if they keep their information up to date. And then the other thing that the guys are working on that I think is great is that a lot of people have a vague sort of interest in missions, but they haven't really thought it through very much. Maybe they just have the sense, I think I'm called to missions, but that's a broad area, isn't it? So when we go on, when a person like that goes online on YWAM.org, they can choose to answer some questions about what their real interests are. And as they answer the questions, they realize, well, actually, I'm interested in the Indian subcontinent, I'm interested in primary health care, and I'm interested in clean water. That may be their answers, or it may be, Cambodia and housing refugees or whatever. But by answering those questions, then it can lead them to say that the 7, 8, 10, 15, 30 YWAM bases that have that kind of ministry and that kind of training available to them. But on all these things, as I said, with communication evolving so rapidly and being so more and more segmented, more and more precise, you use this for that purpose, this for that purpose, this for that purpose. We have to attract more people with real communications and IT skills, and we have to stay right on top of it, because we are called to mobilize at least another 200,000 missionaries in the next decade or so. To do that, we've got to communicate really well and keep communication as one of our primary focuses, recruiting more and more people in who can do that, and keep impressing onto all of our leaders. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Tell people what you're doing. Don't lose the contact details for a person who's interested in what you're doing. They might be somebody who you will mobilize in the future, or they might be somebody who will be a key resource for what you're called to do. Communicate.